Welcome to Nova's Here. My name is Greg Horn. We are continuing our conversation with Jason Romano. He is the author of a new book called Live to Forgive, Moving Forward When Those We Love Hurt Us. Jason, for you sports fans, has a background. He was a producer, executive producer at ESPN for almost 17 years, won some Emmy Awards there, and did a lot of talented things there, but he transitioned to Sports Spectrum a couple years ago. It's a website, and you have also a magazine, and he started a podcast in March of 2017 that already has over 500,000 downloads. One of my favorite interviews that you've done recently was actually, though, not with an athlete, which I love sports and Jesus, but you did one with Erwin McManus in May, and man, I couldn't believe the guy is still playing basketball, he said.
60 years old and he's playing basketball. I'm 45 and I stopped playing a year or two ago. I was just afraid of tearing an ACL or an Achilles or something, and this dude's out there every day at 60 years old playing ball. Yeah, I was a little jealous too, Greg.
Yeah, I am. I'm 54, and I was like, I'm like you. My days have been long gone, and love basketball. And then, of course, he said he's also a Los Angeles Clippers fan. So, man, he's got to be a pretty happy guy with this offseason.
Yeah, I'd love to get him back on next year and talk to him about having Kawhi there and just the Clippers being a perennial, really a favorite to win it all now. So he's got to be basking in the glow of the Clippers and the future of their team in 2019, 2020.
Well, if you missed yesterday's program with Jason, we delved into his father's situation of being an alcoholic and just the traumatic effect it had on him as a child, as it would any child. If you missed that, I want to encourage you to go check out the podcast. You can go to our website, hopeisheretoday.org. That's hopeisheretoday.org, and check out that 14-minute podcast. But Jason's continue delving into your book. You had a great quote in there on page 38. It says, "To fully forgive, we must delve into the pain that the abuser or perpetrator caused." And man, to do that, though, it's easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much easier said than done. And I think, a lot of us, when we're angry about something, we don't want to delve into any kind of pain. We just want to be angry. And sometimes we don't respond properly in that anger, and we lash out, and we scream, and we call the perpetrator names that, in many ways, we're committing the same sin that they're committing to us, if you really, truly look at it that way. It's a lot easier said than done, but I believe it's important. And I use those words, fully forgive, because I think sometimes we think that when we forgive someone that we kind of let them off the hook and, we've forgiven them, just don't do it again. And that's really not fully forgiving someone, because the forgiveness isn't about the other person. When we enter into forgiveness, it's really about ourselves. And that's why I talk about delving into the pain that the abuser or perpetrator caused, because it's about us. It's about the response that we have. It's about us evaluating that trauma that's taken place and trying to enter into a place where we can move forward when someone's hurt us in a bad way. And like I said, easier said than done. But that's what it is. It's really about trying to delve into that pain and evaluate the trauma that has taken place.
Well, one of the things I thought was really just a key point here early in your book, you talked about allowing yourself to feel whatever confusing thing is disrupting you. And you said, you can cry, you can scream, you can shout. Share a little bit about when you finally, it just came to a boiling point for you. I believe you were a young child, or 11, 12, somewhere, and you just laid on the bathroom floor and locked the door and just laid on the floor and just let all that pain out. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was the first time. I was a little older. I think I was about 14, and I started to get to a point, how all teenagers are, that they become more aware of what's happening around them. It's one thing to be 7 or 8. It's another thing to be 10, 11, and it's another thing to be a teenager. And I think really when kids become teenagers, they really start to understand a little bit more about what's going on and having these feelings. And I was getting ready one day, I think it was 1988, to go see a Mets-Cardinals game with my dad. We were going to take a bus trip down to Shea Stadium, the old Shea Stadium there in Flushing, New York, and watch the Mets in their heyday in the mid-1980s with Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden. And we were going to go down there and watch a game. And that's a big deal. Again, we didn't go to games as much as I go to now. If we went to one game every couple of years, that was it. And we weren't a very well-off family. We didn't have a lot of money, and tickets were not easy to come by if you didn't live close to the place that the games were being played at. And so my dad got tickets on a bus trip, and we were going down, and I was going to go stay at his house, which was the same house that my grandparents at that time lived. So I went on a Saturday night to his house and excited for the game the next morning, and he shows up around an hour or two later, and he's wasted. And he had just gone out to the bars and spent some time with his friends or whatever, and came back, and he was drunk. And that was my boiling point for me at 14 years old, of feeling this pain that he had caused. I lashed out at him. I screamed and yelled, but I did it behind this protective barrier of the bathroom door, which I had ran into the bathroom, shut the door, locked it, and just kind of sat there on the floor, angry, ticked off that my dad had, quote unquote, betrayed me. This was a very unique time in my life because you're in high school and you're trying to figure out life and figure out who your friends are and try to fit in and all this anyways. And the one person or the two people that you feel like you can count on at that age are your parents. And my dad had let me down. Truly let me down for the first time. And I took it personally. Like, why did you do this to me? How come you let me down? This wasn't about what he was going through. At that point, I could care less what he was going through. I just knew that he had hurt me. And I just knew that this was going to potentially affect a big day, which would be the next day to go see my favorite baseball team with my father. And so I just let it out. I hid on the bathroom floor, and you want to talk about feeling pain and truly letting that get to you. That was the moment for me.
Well, I like in your book, you kind of reevaluate where things are at. You talked about in chapter 1, just kind of the reality of things. And then you said, in chapter 2, it's okay to feel confusing and disruptive things with myself. Then you shared that anger and hatred are okay, but they must be moved through and managed. And beneath the anger is usually some form of sadness or grief that must be carefully evaluated and fully experienced. And then you go into chapter 5 talking about death and resurrection. And you had a great quote: "There's no resurrection without the crucifixion, no rebirth without death." And man, we all love the resurrection and Easter Sunday, but wow, there was a lot that went on, a lot of pain before that, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. And that resurrection, that sort of coming out of coming back from the dead, if you will, like Lazarus, that didn't take place for a very long time. But it's something I've learned that it really does need to take place if you want to turn the channel to a different station in your life. If you're going through that, in that feeling the pain process and sort of allowing yourself to feel, it is a metaphor in a lot of ways for the death and resurrection of what Jesus did on the cross. And I wrote this book not as a Christian book per se. You read it, Greg, so you know this. I wrote it so any person going through a difficult time of forgiving could read it and have it play a part in their life and help them. But at the same time, I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I'm a guy who walks with the Lord and has put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ. So I'm writing this through my lens, and that's my lens. And so my lens sees Jesus on the cross and sees his death and resurrection, his death and burial and resurrection. And in a lot of ways, that was what it took for me. There was a long process for me to go through that depth of anger towards my dad, and then sort of coming out on the other side. The resurrection in many ways is when we forgive, because that's when we're freed from the bitterness and the anger that we have towards someone that hurt us. It's really, truly when we enter into a place of forgiveness and we feel like we are resurrected in a lot of ways. It's like taking this giant weight off our shoulders and releasing these chains that will keep us in bondage if we don't learn to forgive and move forward.
In the second section of your book, you titled it "Evaluating the Trauma," and I just thought that you had a powerful example, a chapter you call "Boxes in the Attic." Can you share with us about that?
Yeah, so for so many of us, when we're going through situations in our life, when we're going through hurt and pain and anger towards something, a lot of times what we like to do is we like to take that and we like to put it to the side, almost like putting it in a box and storing it in the attic. You think of what boxes in the attic are. They're memories, they're moments, they're treasures. There's all these things that you put into this box. You put it in the attic and you just store it there. And for a lot of us, I mean, I can tell you there's boxes in my attic right now, like legitimate boxes in there of memories that we haven't taken out or looked at in 6 or 7 years. And so in a metaphorical sense, with our memories and the things that we go through, when somebody hurts us, we like to think that we've moved forward, and we'll put that pain and that bitterness and that anger into a box, and we'll just store it up in the attic. And as long as it's up there, it's not bothering anybody, and we don't have to deal with it. But eventually, we got to pull that box out of the attic and open it up and see what's inside. And that's why it's so important for us to not have these boxes in the attic. We have to evaluate what's happening in our lives, and we have to deal with it and not suppress it and throw it into a box and store it and put it away. Because eventually it's going to come to a boiling point, and we have to address it. And for me, that was a situation with my dad of having to address this pain, this anger, this bitterness that I had with him for so many years. I couldn't just store it away and hope that I never had to deal with it again, because it was always there. And that's really what the Boxes in the Attic chapter is about.
Well, I just thought it was a powerful visual, and you had a great quote you shared from Tim Keller. He said, "Suffering can refine us rather than destroy us, because God himself walks with us in the fire." And I think that's kind of one of the great lies of the enemy, isn't it, Jason, that, you can't walk through this because you'll be by yourself.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, no, don't worry about it. You're good. Everything's be fine. And, yeah, it's funny now that I look back, the greatest teacher in life is adversity. I really believe that. I would have never said that to you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but now that I'm in my mid-40s and you realize, we all go through adversity on some level. Some of it is what I like to say way worse than what I went through, but my adversity is my adversity, and the majority of my adversity consisted of my dad and the relationship with him. And I look back now and I realize that adversity that I went through with him has made me the man that I am now, the dad, the husband, the podcaster, the worker, the writer, whatever it is that you want to put as a title for me. I got refined because of the valleys of the shadow of death that I had to walk through, as it says in Psalm 23, knowing that God was with me and carried me and walked me through those times, just as that psalm says. And that's why I love what Keller says, too. I mean, he says that it can refine us rather than destroy us because God walks with us in that fire. And, even when I wasn't walking with God, he was walking with me until I finally said yes to him in 2001 and started walking with him. But he was always there and carried me through, even in the times that I didn't realize it. And now it's made me the better man and husband that I am today because of that. But it wasn't fun going through it. That's the part that we always have to remember is when we're going through difficult situations, when we're going through the fire, it's going to hurt. It's going to burn. It's going to stink. But at the same time, if we can get through the process of the pain, it'll make us better on the other side.
Well, that's why I love that you're saying, God is going to be with you. You talked about, I've come to learn that God is one of withness. I like that instead of witness, WITHNESS. And you quoted Psalm 35, a verse that's really meant a lot to me in my life, that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And if you're listening and you've kind of lost hope, that verse may be for you right now to give you hope. That Jason quoted that Bible verse in his book, and just hold on. That's why we do Hope is Here, and I use the acronym HOPE, HOPE, and the first letter H is to hold on. So just remember that God is with you. You're not alone. But I hope you'll join us tomorrow as we're going to continue our conversation with author Jason Romano, his outstanding book, Live to Forgive, Moving Forward When Those We Love Hurt Us. I'm Greg Horn. We'll see you tomorrow on Hope is Here.
To go to the next level, you have to change the way that you think. There is way more inside of you than you can imagine.
Everyone has influence. Come to the Global Leadership Summit on August 9th and 10th and learn skills to help you lead transformation. The summit features high-impact leaders like Craig Groeschel, Angela Ahrens, T.D. Jakes, and more. Experience the Global Leadership Summit on August 9th and 10th. Register today at willowcreek.com/summit or call 800-570-9812 and use the priority code radio.
Local host site in Central Kentucky is Lex City Church. Check them out online at lexcity.church.